Infamous deadly accidents in Disneyland that should never have happened. Disneyland is called the happiest place on Earth, a place of wonder and adventure for kids and adults alike, with some of the oldest recognizable characters in media, like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, as attractions in the park. The California Park is home to some of the world's largest, most impressive attractions and has been visited by over 757 million people since its opening in 1955. It's home to Star Wars, Marvel, Disney's classic characters, you name it. But Disneyland isn't made up of only good times and magical happenings. The park has a dark, shady history. Accidents, employee abuse, unexplained events that to this day cannot be explained. It's an understatement to say that Disneyland has had its trouble in the past. In today's video, we'll explore some of the events that have taken place in Disneyland, tell the stories of the people involved, and try to make sense of everything. Disneyland is a theme park in Anaheim, California that was opened in 1955 by the Walt Disney Company, directly under the supervision of visionary and founder Walt Disney. Walt Disney was truly a visionary. When he started the project for Disney, he thought that the site next to the Disney Studios in Burbank was too small for his ambition, so he purchased a 160-acre plot of land in Anaheim in 1953 to begin the construction of his theme park. Famous for the incredibly creative and interesting buildings in its park, like Main Street USA, opened in 2010, the Adventureland, themed for a 1950s view of adventure, Mickey's Toontown, and Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, the park is an incredible construction, visited by more than 1 million people since its opening, with a record-setting 18.66 million visitors in 2019. The park was a marvel of design and innovation on its inception in 1955 and has continued to inspire and awe people from all over the world, as was the intention of its founder. In Walt Disney's own words, as put on the original dedication of the park, "To all who come to this happy place, welcome. Disneyland is your land. Here age relives fond memories of the past, and here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future. Disneyland is dedicated to the ideals, the dreams, and the hard facts that have created America, with the hope that it will be a source of joy and inspiration to all the world." But it hasn't been all smiles with Disneyland. As bright and beautiful a legacy that Walt Disney left, his park did not go through the last 67 years unscathed. From protests to employee troubles to the events we will discuss in today's video, the Magic Kingdom sometimes can be more terrifying than inspiring. Brandon Zucker. On the 5th of September 2000, a 4-year-old boy named Brandon Zucker was visiting Disneyland with his family to celebrate his mother's 40th birthday. They spent the day in the park, going on the rides and enjoying the meals offered in the restaurants. When they were about to leave the park, Brandon asked to ride a last attraction before they left, the Roger Rabbit's Cartoon Spin, an attraction opened in January of 1994. The details of Brandon's case are very gruesome and terrible. Brandon was placed in one of the rides on the attraction, but for some reason, he wasn't properly placed in his seat. When the attraction started moving, he tumbled from his seat and fell on the platform where the cars were spinning, and, caught by another car, had his body folded in half. His mother described it as being folded like a ball. When that happened, Brandon's parents despaired. His father started screaming at the top of his lungs to stop the cars, that his son needed help and that he was gonna die. His mother started crying uncontrollably, but the staff of Disneyland weren't trained at the time to call 911 immediately if something went wrong. So faced with a 4-year-old kid trapped under a metal car in the attraction, the employees just tried to calm the parents down until the security forces could get there, and then called the fire department. That procedure only wasted precious time. When Brandon's body was folded, his organs were pushed upwards, making it harder to breathe. Brandon was in that position for 10 minutes. 10 precious minutes that caused a serious problem for Brandon. His diaphragm was torn, as well as his spleen and liver, and because he was bent like that, he couldn't breathe properly, and the lack of oxygen on young Brandon's brain caused severe damage. After the accident, although he'd smile and laugh occasionally, he never talked or walked again for the rest of his life. Brandon would spend the next 8 years of his life in and out of hospital fighting the severe damages his terrible accident caused him. He died at 13 years old in his mother's arms at the Children's Hospital of Orange County. His mother, Victoria Zucker, tried to keep her spirits high throughout Brandon's treatments and suffering. Upon his passing, she said that he was making up for the lost time. He's running and playing with all his legs and feet on his scooter up there in heaven. Victoria Zucker said, "We did every kind of therapy and everything we could possibly do for him in the 8 years he had. He just got tired, but he could still give us a lot of love, and we gave it back to him." After Brandon's accident, the family sued Disneyland for its gross incompetence and negligence in the accident. The accident was a profoundly traumatic event for the family of young Brandon, and its consequences were so deep that it changed the procedures within the park. After the incident, staff were oriented to call 911 immediately after any occurrence in the park. They also installed more safety changes to the ride, including a sensor-equipped guard around the bottom of each car. The accident also marked the first major investigation conducted by the State Division of Occupational Safety and Health under a law regulating amusement parks. The state determined that Disneyland employees did not properly load Brandon into the ride, with the smallest child furthest from the cutout entryway, and failed to fully lower the lap bar. Brandon's family settled out of court for an undisclosed amount that has been speculated to have been calculated by the costs of care for young Brandon and the damages suffered by the family. Brandon was survived by his parents and his older brother, Nicholas. The gruesome accident and the painful life of young Brandon were a direct cause of the negligence and improper training of the park staff, who didn't load Brandon properly on his chair, didn't fully lower the bar, didn't place him on the right seat on the toy, and, worst of all, left the kid there for 10 whole minutes instead of immediately calling 911 to help on his removal from the car he was stuck under. The Matterhorn Disaster. The Matterhorn bobsleds, or just Matterhorn, is an attraction composed of 2 intertwining steel roller coasters, debuted in 1959 in the Disneyland Park in Anaheim, California. It's modeled after the Matterhorn, a mountain in the Swiss Alps. Walt Disney came to the idea of building the Matterhorn after he took an extended vacation in the Swiss Alps while filming Third Man on the Mountain. Joining his love of roller coasters, the dirt that had been dug up for building Sleeping Beauty's castle moat, and the need to install a decorative overlay in the location to camouflage the central pylon of the Skyway, Disney employed the Matterhorn decoration into the mound of dirt. Often, visitors can catch glimpses of alpinists' tread in the gear of legitimate Swiss alpinists climbing the Matterhorn, along with Disney characters such as Goofy or Mickey. The ride consists of 2 separate tracks that run roughly parallel to each other for much of the ride, intertwining and eventually deviating from each other at loading areas. They are the Fantasyland track and Tomorrowland track, named for the side of the mountain their associated loading line begins in. The vehicle holds up to 4 passengers each, seated single file. After the 1978 upgrade, the individual vehicles were joined into pairs, increasing the capacity to 8 riders. The safety restraints consist of a simple airline-style seatbelt. There are hand grips inside the cars as well as a handrail outside the shell of the vehicle. The Matterhorn is a classic attraction on the Anaheim location, often sought out by visitors and tourists. But on 2 separate occasions, the Matterhorn cost the life of more than one of its riders. The first, Mark Lynn Maples, was born on April 6, 1949 in Los Angeles, California. In May 19, 1964, the then 15-years-old Mark went on the Matterhorn attraction at Disneyland. It was midnight when Mark got to the Matterhorn. He spent the last few weeks grounded by his parents and was finally tasting freedom once more. Mark sat in the middle seat of the ride. In the dark of the tunnels, his companions couldn't tell what had happened, only that one boy felt Mark bump into him as the bobsled was going down the mountain. "There was no way to tell what he was doing," he said. "It's a bumpy kind of ride. I was looking up, heard a noise, looked down, and recognized Mark's sweater as he was falling out of the side." The other boy added to the press telegram. Disney officials speculated that Mark had unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up on the ride. When he did so, he apparently struck his head on the side of the concrete mountain and fell on the tracks of the sled. The sled was going about 20 miles per hour when this happened. The ride operators didn't believe that Mark had fallen when first informed. It was only when two girls that were on the ride behind him verified the story that the cart was shut down. Mark was rushed to the hospital with severe head trauma and was put on a ventilator. After 4 days without ever regaining consciousness, Mark died. After his death, officials made a thorough investigation of the ride, including doing slow-motion trips down the mountain to try to identify what had happened. The press was needlessly heartless about the incident. One reporter called Mark a daredevil youth, claiming he was to blame for the unfortunate occurrence. After the investigation couldn't properly identify the reason for Mark's death, the event was ruled purely accidental. Mark's death was the first ever recorded at the Disneyland site. The second case of death in the Matterhorn happened 20 years after the first accident took place. In January of 1984, Dolly Regina Young, a 48-year-old tourist from San Jose, California, was visiting the Anaheim Disneyland as part of a trip. Around 3:30 p.m., Young and some friends got into one of the bobsleds at the base of the mountain. Young sat alone in the back of the bobsled. At the time, the Skyway gondola still went through the attraction, ferrying guests through a hole in the mountain. When the Skyway gondola passed over the Matterhorn, the people inside it began to scream. Helen Pishner, 19, screamed first. Helen told police she remembered seeing a female bouncing on her back on the tracks moments after presumably falling from her sled. For a moment, Helen said it looked like Young was trying to get up. 33 seconds after Young fell from her bobsled, the next ride vehicle came around the corner. Don Pishner yelled for his daughters to look away. The next bobsled had a family on it. For a moment, they thought the body in the tracks was perhaps a prop. However, as they got closer, reality set in. The bobsled hit Young directly in the head and torso. She was killed instantly. The ride shut down automatically, sensing that a bobsled was stuck. When the screaming from the passengers was heard in the control room, the workers knew that something had gone horribly wrong. One worker raced up the mountain and found the gruesome scene. On his ride down, he encountered two other workers that were rushing up the mountain to see what was happening. He told them not to look. Police and paramedics were soon on the scene, where Young was declared dead. An investigation was launched by Anaheim detectives. They quickly ruled out foul play and suicide and zeroed in on the seatbelt. When police arrived on the scene, they noted Young's seatbelt was open and lying on her empty seat. Means it could have been either way, Detective Carl Martin told the LA Times. If she stood up, her belt could have fallen on the seat, or she might have been sitting on it. Disney protocol was to check the belt of guests twice before giving the go-ahead to the carts. Disney officials simply had no way to explain what had happened to Miss Young. After interviewing witnesses, Anaheim detective David Tuttle ruled Young's death as an accident. It could be, it will never be determined what actually happened, Tuttle told the media. The day after the accident, the Matterhorn was opened again. The sled that Young was on was put back to work along with the mountain. The one that hit her was put away for further testing. In February 1984, a month after the accident, Young's husband filed a $5 million wrongful death lawsuit against Disney. 4 years later, just as the Young case was entering jury selection, both parties reached a settlement. All parties were barred from discussing the terms of the deal, but a Disneyland spokesperson said the lawsuit was settled to the satisfaction of the Walt Disney Company. Debbie Stone. The tragedy that befell young Debbie Stone in the summer of 1974 is one of particular pain. The death of a young girl with a whole life ahead of her is always a fact to be lamented. So far, we've covered deaths of visitors to the park, but Debbie's is the only death on record of a Disneyland employee. Deborah's death was an event of absolute misfortune brought about by either malice, incompetence, or a sad accident. But one thing is for certain, the case remains, to this day, one of the most shocking events to happen inside the Disneyland location. Usually with tragedies in Disneyland, as soon as the media coverage dies down, so too does the public interest in the case. But with Debbie's case, it was different. For years, people kept asking employees about her, wanting to know more about her case, to go to the place where the accident happened. Some go so far as asking for pictures of her. The building where it all happened, America Sings, was closed in 1989, and up until it was closed, people would constantly ask about Debbie. To understand this public infatuation with the young girl, let's first get to know about her. Deborah Gale Stone was the first child of Bill and Marilyn Stone and was born on June 18, 1956 in Santa Ana, California. Beautiful and talented, she excelled in academics as well as athletics, especially track and swimming. Along with her impressive curriculum, there's the Lacey Peterson factor. At 5'5" and 100 pounds, Deborah was young, beautiful, healthy, and intelligent, and just about to embark on her adult life. A few weeks earlier, she'd graduated with honors from Santa Ana High School, where she was a star athlete, student, and winner of the year's Principal's Award for her outstanding accomplishments. She had just enrolled herself for freshman year at the Iowa State University and, as any excited teenager, longed to work in the land of dreams, Disneyland. In order to save for her college tuition, she applied for a summer job at Disneyland and soon landed herself with the coveted job of being a Disneyland hostess. Deborah also makes an especially sympathetic figure because, as far as could be determined, she didn't do anything wrong. The park's fatalities before and since, up until the deaths involving the sailing ship Columbia in 1998 and Big Thunder Railroad in 2003, were all caused by victim recklessness. Someone, typically a teenager on grad night, did something they weren't supposed to do, like stand up on a bobsled or jump between cars on the People Mover. Deborah wasn't goofing off, she was just doing her job. In addition, every other victim was a guest. Deborah was the sole Disneyland cast member. We always like to think that ride operators, like airline pilots, are a little safer and a little smarter than the rest of us. After all, if they can get hurt, what's to protect us? Finally, the accident continues to reverberate because it was so unique and previously unimaginable. For once, it wasn't a case of someone falling out of a vehicle or getting run over or drowning. Someone was crushed between two walls. During a presentation on June 28, 1974, just shy of 3 weeks past Deborah's birthday, she was working on the America Signs presentation. The venue consists of an outer ring of 6 theaters that rotated around various scenes on a fixed central stage. The hostess's job was to greet audiences over a microphone from the left side of the stage, and then, after the theater had rotated around the 5 musical scenes, to bid them goodbye. After every show that lasted about 24 minutes, there was a 45-second interval after the audience had left the theater in which the stage moved into position to start a new cycle. In this interval of less than a minute, something happened to make Deborah fall on the passageway between the moving theater wall and the stationary stage wall. No one knows what caused her fall, a simple mishap, a step backwards too far, maybe she tried to jump from one stage to the other. Fellow operators think she leaned back on purpose because when the building was used for the Carousel of Progress, it rotated in the opposite direction and was safe to lean back to talk to co-workers in adjacent theaters. But Debbie was a new hire. She'd never worked the Carousel of Progress. Whatever the cause of her fall, it shows that the designers of the ride simply made an accident waiting to happen with their design. With the Carousel of Progress hostess at the left end of the theater, she'd be safely behind the moving wall as it clockwise approached the stationary wall. With the theater now turning counterclockwise, she was precariously in front of the moving wall as it closed in on the stationary wall. The cause of Debbie's accident is still unclear all these years later, but one thing is for certain. Her parents' faith was not shaken by it. In fact, they believed her passing, however sad and unfortunate, had a purpose. Time has slowly brought solace to the Stone family and drawn them even closer to Jesus Christ. Deborah's death inspired one of her 4 younger brothers, David, to become a missionary in the South Pacific. Even after almost 50 years, Deborah's death is still talked about, and through that, she still affects people. After Debbie's death, the America Sings attraction was closed for 2 days while a safety light that alerted the attraction operator whenever someone got too close to the danger area was installed. Debbie's death went viral on TikTok on June of 2021, almost 47 years after her death. When asked how he conceived the idea of Disneyland, Walt Disney once said he imagined there ought to be an enchanting place for parents and children to have memorable times together. But this tangible tale is more complex. Enchantment can be a fatal job, and in Disneyland, the formula for making dreams come true includes not only pixie dust and fascinating props and rides, but the arduous work of very mortal beings performing in a risky world where sometimes things can go gravely wrong. Be it an accident in a bobsled, falling off a cart, or between two walls, there's always danger in the Disneyland paradise, and it doesn't hurt to be careful. So what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments section down below. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, dive deeply into the like and subscribe buttons. See you again soon in another video, if you dare.